A lot of people will argue that, Western science bad, Indigenous knowledge good, man-made bad, natural good. It's very easy to cherry pick stuff to go old ways good, new ways bad. But, Aboriginal knowledge, Indigenous knowledge it's actually pretty aligned with the scientific process. Yeah, I think there's a bit of a misconception out there about what Indigenous knowledge is.
It's knowledge production.
Yeah.
The way of knowledge production.
Knowledge production. Nailed it. Mm-hmm. Oh, my sister, we're talking the same language here.
Hello and welcome to Planet Critical, the podcast for a world in crisis. My name is Rachel Donald. I'm a climate corruption journalist and your host. Every week I interview experts who are battling to save our planet. My guests are scientists, politicians, academics, journalists, and activists. They explain the complexities of the energy, economic, political, and cultural crises we face today, revealing what's really going on and what they think needs to be done. These are the stories of the big picture. Go to planetcritical.com to learn more and subscribe. My guest this week is Tyson Yunkaporta. Tyson is an Aboriginal scholar and author working at Deakin University, where he investigates Indigenous knowledge production, distributed governance, land reclamation, the colonisation of space, and even the art of writing itself. A lot of you listeners have really clamoured to get Tyson on over the years, so I'm really glad to have had him on the show, and we just have a wonderful conversation. We weave and we dart and we braid, discussing the harmony in Indigenous systems that belongs to an interweaving of ontologies and epistemologies, which means ways of being and ways of knowing, and compare this to the post-structuralist discourse in the West, which includes a lot of decolonial thinking, and begin to try to tease apart how and why these ways of knowing are facilitating the creation of thicker and impermeable boundaries between people. Tyson goes on to explain border work, how to permeate these boundaries and work together. We discuss, of course, capitalism, colonialism, and the actions that are taken in resistance, with Tyson explaining his schema really for identifying actions that belong to a continuation of the same pyramid scheme that we exist in, or genuine, caring resistance that can actually begin to move the needle in this world. And he ends by explaining the system of signals that we all live in, humans and more than humans and the land. And it's actually at this moment, towards the end of the episode, that he answers the very first question. Why is the world in crisis? Weaving in everything that we have discussed throughout the episode and inviting all of us back to the land to listen and to be in order to understand. I hope you all enjoy the episode. If you do, please share it far and wide. And if you're loving the show, become a patron on Patreon or support Planet Critical with a paid subscription at planetcritical.com. By signing up, you'll get the Planet Critical newsletter inspired by each episode delivered straight to your inbox every week. You'll also have access to the wonderful Planet Critical community who are full of inspiring thoughts, ideas, critiques, and determination. The links are in the description box below. I'm so grateful to everyone who chooses to support the project. I'm a vehement believer in ad-free and open access content, so Planet Critical wouldn't exist without the direct support of the amazing community. Thank you so much to all of you who believe in Planet Critical and keep the project going every week. Tyson, welcome to Planet Critical. It is a pleasure to have you on the show.
Yeah, I like the title, Planet Critical.
Thank you very much. It came to me
where critical has had to shift. It used to mean something else 10 years ago, 20 years ago, but post-truth, postmodernism, it's critical is not just critiquing stuff. It's like going, oh my God, everything's on fire. Help. Yeah. So we're there.
Yeah.
I like it. I like the title.
Thank you. It was definitely meant as a sort of double entendre.
Yeah. And you were on a train.
I was on a train when it came to me.
Okay.
I was rebranding from the original name.
Right.
Trying to figure out how to encompass all of these huge things that I was getting taught about from these wonderful people that would give me an hour of their time. And I just thought, well, it's got to be as big a picture as possible, hence the planet. And critical, we need to start thinking critically together for this critical period and thinking differently. So that colon does a lot of heavy lifting.
Wonderful people are only remain wonderful for as long as they have an hour to spare for that. You know, I think once too many eyes get on somebody, and you know their time becomes money, they cease to be wonderful anymore. Yeah.
I've always been very moved by the willingness of people like you who are very, very busy trying to do what they can in the world for the world to make time for, you know, especially back then, what was a minnow platform.
Yeah.
And yes, I do think it speaks to people's character.
Yeah. Well, these are the yarns. You have to make time for the yarns, not just the recorded ones. I mean, they're useful because more people get to participate, I guess.
Yeah.
But you know, just the yarns, people sitting, talking. You know, we always make room for that. That's important. You know, you're not living your culture here unless you're having those, you know, those deep yarns sitting together. You know, so there's always got to be time for that.
You know, this is normally where I'd say I have to ask you the first question, but I'm gonna put a pin in that just for a minute because I know that you want to discuss epistemology, and I was having a conversation a few nights ago with somebody who's thinking about launching a podcast because they want to have these yarns, and was saying what can ever be the problem with, you know, conversation or dialogue? Surely that's always a good thing. And I said, yeah, but you know, if you want to have like anti-vax people on a show, you have to remember that the podcast is the medium. Like the medium is the messaging, and people will absorb information differently if it comes through a good microphone and a logo and a weekly timetable than if it was just a conversation that you were having in your living room.
Yeah. That's it. Well, I don't know. It's yes, listen to everybody. You know, that's important. And in our Aboriginal cultures here, even here where I'm sitting far from home, because I'm a bummer from up north, but down here it's Koori, you know, country in the Kulin Nations and Bunurong land now. That the idea that, you know, like everyone can speak, there's free speech, but, you know, there's limitations on that in terms of, you know, because of our focus on autonomy, you know, as the first building block of our law. You know, you can't compel anyone to do anything. So therefore, you know, you don't have to listen. But that's a little bit, you know, that doesn't work in a scaled up civilization. It's a little bit like the logic then of, well, if you don't like it, if you don't like our policies, then you're welcome to leave. Go and live in another country. You know, it's a bit like that at scale. So, but there's more because, you know, and I'm talking about the yarns, but then there's big important yarns too, like, you know, ceremonial, you know, conversations and governance, you know, questions where you've usually got about 5 people, you know, speaking. And they're not necessarily chiefs or leaders, but they're the ones who have the knowledge of the context, you know, that you're talking about, the place where you are or the place that you're talking about, the situation, etc. So people will listen, and those 5, they might step back, you know, as somebody else needs to, you know, step in, you know, something arising, you know, that they have the specialist knowledge for, you know, someone else. But, you know, there's limitations, there's rules. You don't set circle, as we often say, like set circle, like, you know, sit down to do important ritual or governance business. You don't set circle with people who are flibbity gibbets or hard heads or two throats. That's like 3 kind of people who, you know, pretty much, you know, they can speak, they jump into the circle, but the circle's finished then. Everyone will just go quiet, and, you know, people will just sort of sit and nod for a bit and then walk away and, you know, then set circle somewhere else later. So flibbertigibbets are people who have like an inconsistent, connection to their, context, reality, position. It's inconsistent and it follows their kind of, motivated reasoning from moment to moment. That's your flibbertigibbets. They're not grounded in any law, and they're not speaking from law or a consensus. Because you have a consensus reality that everyone must speak from in our law, and that's the law. Then, and that reality, that's your ontology. But see, that can, ontology and epistemology is supposed to be almost one thing. So your thinking, your ways of thinking are supposed to map one-to-one with the ontology of what's real. So what's true in your epistemology, how you think about the world, and then your ontology, which is a consensus reality, going back through your ancestors and in your community now, and then forward through all your descendants. That's what's real, and your epistemology is supposed to map onto that, and that's like just arc numperum, like it's our place, but it's like our way, our law, our shared understanding. Anyway, flibbertigibbets are out of step with that. It turns into a bit of a Venn diagram there. Then you've got hard heads is just stubborn people. They're going to think about one issue, and they're always going to be pushing that. And they're going to use persuasion, and they're going to be quite forceful, angry, stubborn. That's not helpful in particular with decision making. And then the last one there, that's two-throat, which is like, I don't know, someone speaks with a forked tongue. It's but we say two throats. Where people are, saying something or arguing something, but they have, a different agenda. They're not speaking from what they're after, because that's occluded, that's hidden, and, they're really just, they're talking up something else. So two throats, they always have, a hidden message, a hidden agenda. And they use a lot of persuasion, and all three of those, they create that Venn diagram where they slide. So there may be a minimal overlap, or there might be two separate circles of the ontology and epistemology, Anyway, so it's, So yes, pluriverses of knowledge, but those pluriverses are created by consensus. It's quite scientific.
Yes.
So, I mean, a lot of people will argue that, Western science bad, Indigenous knowledge good, man-made bad, like synthetic bad, natural good, old ways good, new ways bad, and there's a whole ancient wisdom grift sort of out there that everybody jumps on about, from paleo diets to bloody everything else. Especially a lot of, health, anti-public health influences, and the scientism and, new age stuff, and all the fascism and everything else that's all tied up with that, weirdly, and the soft eugenics of it all. They're always like evoking this primitive, ancient kind of knowledge to support it, but it's always in that sort of bifurcation, that false binary. They use this. They use rhetorical tools that are just logical fallacies. It's very easy to cherry pick stuff to go old ways good, new ways bad. But Aboriginal knowledge, Indigenous knowledge is, it's actually pretty aligned with the scientific process.
Right.
In terms of
consensus building.
The main difference is that peer review happens like from the start before you've even asked the question. It's constant peer review throughout, and constant people, linking it back and aligning it with that ontology, which is your law, the law of your land. And you have specialists who know different things about that law and who, keep it on track. There's that peer review going all the way through, which is pretty good. I guess that would be your literature review in the academy, that part, at the start. But, that's peer review there as well, and it goes all the way through. And it doesn't just end with publication. It keeps going beyond that. But but apart from that, it's the same process of developing scientific consensus, but also remaining fluid, adaptable, incorporating new information, new knowledge, and very carefully studying it, not just having a common sense, knee-jerk, bloody emotional reaction to it, et cetera, et cetera. So, I think there's a bit of a misconception out there about what Indigenous knowledge is. And, it's not just reporting on stuff that used to happen.
Yeah. It's knowledge production. Yeah. The way of knowledge production.
Knowledge production. Nailed it. Oh, my sister, we're talking the same language here.
I was trying to explain to somebody a few nights ago sort of exactly this. Like if you want to dispute something scientific, then you have to understand that one person saying one thing, especially if it's through the format of a YouTube video, does not hold the same weight as the necessary consensus building that the scientific method approaches. And it does that to try and get a glimpse at reality, get a glimpse at what is going on. And because it is informed by so many people and informed by so much detail, and also informed by so much care, quite frankly, I do think in the Western world it is one of the only ways of kind of making decisions and producing knowledge that is akin to certain modes of Indigenous knowledge production, which is that our way of being in the world is how we know about the world. It's how we make the world. The world is contextual. It is fluid. It is shifting all the time. Reality is only the nature of our relationships. And so what we do here and how we do it here matters.
Yeah.
And it's a completely different tradition from the Cartesian. I was speaking to a Samoan woman recently, and she said, "I think, therefore I am God."
Okay.
Like that, he said, "I think, therefore I am," but there is a silent word at the end of that sentence. I think, therefore I am God. Well, and I am capable of seeing everything from my quote unquote objective viewpoint.
I think that in Samoa that the word after the ellipse there would be va, what they call va.
Well,
and that's that relational space in between, which is a sentient, living relational space, that it's your responsibility in your relationships between you and, non-human others that you're in pairs with, family members, friends, people you meet, anyone you're talking to, there's that relational space in between, and it's your duty to beautify and complexify that space. And that's where the knowledge is kept. It's not in your head. There's a kind of distributed cognition, that you find in most human cultures that aren't, that still have remnants of that aren't domesticated. It's always there.
Something I'm very interested about is this idea of part of knowledge gardening. Somebody said that to me a few years ago, and I loved it. Like knowledge gardening, knowledge production in a lot of these cultures that are more than Western, is that it comes through the body as well. Yeah. So it's a way of being in the world that helps you know about the world. And that is very different to a tradition which says, Nietzsche can sit inside his attic and slowly go mad and sort of figure everything out just by himself, as if we are these sort of separate, autonomous creatures whose mind is a gateway to something more. Whereas, surely it's the body in a way that is the gateway to something more, because that is you sort of being this directional expression of life, which is always reaching, always weaving, always interconnecting. Yes.
But and that's really important in Indigenous knowledge production, which is basically just human knowledge production. That's how we do cognition. There's an elder, who that I think, therefore I am, God, or whatever you said. It's like she says, I am located, therefore I am. So a lot of our cognition is spatial, and it's about locatedness and trajectory as much as anything else. But this is, I think this is important, though, that idea of a subjective self, being connected to a broader objectivity, and that your experience of being in this body and your emotional reaction to things, that's a big part of it, of forming your epistemology, understanding your ontology. But I think in like contemporary, sort of weird, Western educated, industrialized, rich, democratic, which is the default culture for the planet now.
Yeah.
I think with this, that's unfortunately where the concept of common sense comes from. So people's gut reaction to everything, an initial reaction has got to be the right one, and it's just common sense that that's right, But in a highly individualized kind of economy and global culture, that's a problem. So, the Indigenous way of working with that is that, yes, you are, so we don't even really talk about thinking. It's like think feeling. It's something we do together, but you pay attention to what's happening in your body, and your subjective experience is important, and you act from that. However, you are held, you're constrained, you're limited by having that as a shared experience with all of the others that you're connected to, through your network. So human and non-human kin, and even sort of sentient places and sentient objects and all these sorts of things. So you're limited in that. You're steered by it, but you can't run off on your own hard head, flippity-gibbet, two-throat, along these little adventures that are just following the things you're passionate about or the opinions that you might have. And this sort of became it's become a bit of a problem over the last few decades in like decolonial, post-colonial, critical theory, deconstructivist, post-structuralist, postmodern kind of thought is this kind of reification of the subjective experience, So there's the idea, of that you can identify the structures of power, in the discourse of the society by reading through that, and that's pretty good, But then there was also this kind of sense of, well, no, the lived experience of a person, the standpoint of a person as an individual thing, it confers authority on a scholar, speaking from that. So in Indigenous standpoint theory, the idea is that that's supposed to be balanced with, so you name who you belong to and what place, what culture, what people. So there's that idea that your claims are verifiable and falsifiable and are constantly tested, by people of cultural authority and knowledge, in your community, so you have your individual standpoint, but it's constantly sort of mitigated from you just making claims and saying, well, I don't have to show evidence for that because that's my lived experience. It stops you from doing that. But a lot of people, it's often referred to as the McDonaldization of standpoint theory and stuff like that. The McDonaldization of these things. It's people are proclaiming their fabulous identities and genealogies and lineages, and having that as a passport for like anything that comes out of my mouth is truth.
Yes.
And if you challenge that, then you're somehow, you're not right.
Yes. Yes.
So we kind of lose that peer review. We lose that constant checking in, with each other in our thinking, feeling, which is, collaborative, which is collective, and must be, not just with humans, but non-humans and landscapes and such. So that's tricky.
Let's keep going on that, because this is a conversation I'm having a lot in private, and one that is quite difficult to have publicly, I would say, because of what you just said, what happens when you disagree, essentially. And after that Samoan woman said to me, "I think, therefore I am God," I said, I wonder if that's sort of what happened in Western postmodern post-structuralist discourse, that the idea was we obviously need to open up the possibility of other lived experiences and other subjectivities, and that's very important.
Yeah.
But rather than finding a way to interweave those things, which is a very big ask in a tradition coming from the Cartesian modality, it's almost like everybody's subjective narrative became that of gods.
Yeah.
Now, everybody's subjective experience
that's
is
it.
the objective
That's
reality.
it. Yeah. And somehow we'll confer some kind of wisdom, you know, to everything, that a person can speak across every discipline and with authority, you know, based on this sovereign self. You know, that's almost like a little corporation, you know, that whole neoliberal subject thing. You're responsible for your own marketing and, you know, upkeep and everything else, you know. So people just speaking from that, it's a problem.
Isn't it? I mean, the relief in my body. It is a problem, and I really want to try and, you know, think with people to sort of approach what we do about it, because at the moment we're creating these very prejudiced bubbles where some people are not allowed to speak, and then other people are essentially are provided a platform to speak based on abuse. It's like the most abused bodies are now sort of the not actually the arbiters, because colonial capitalism doesn't give a flying fuck. But within these sort of academic or political spaces, especially on the left, it's abused bodies that are taking this stand to speak on everything.
Well, that means the focus becomes grievance.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? And that's where you get your flippity gibbets and hardheads, you know. And that's often, you know, it's often bullshit too. You know, it's like, it's a sort of a skewed reality in this proclamation. But, you know, what's weird is that these are the tools and weapons that during the culture wars that have just been raging for decades now, you know, these are the tools that the right, that your authoritarian leaning, white supremacist kind of leaning, misogynist kind of folks that backlash against feminism, backlash against bloody everything. These are the tools that they found on the battlefield, you know, and they picked them up. You know, so they've been able, you know, so you look at, I mean, I don't know if you remember back in the, you know, the debates between the debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, when they were doing the whole, when he was doing the whole, they're eating the cats and dogs sort of thing, you know, and straight away fact check comes through, and, you know, and then in the weeks afterwards, you know, it's like, here's the actual, you know, verifiable facts of that. It's just not happening. In fact, the opposite is happening, and, you know, these people have revitalized the community, et cetera, and the economy. But then J.D. Vance just was able to stand up and say, you know, how dare you? It's like, it doesn't matter that it's not empirically true. This is how we're feeling, and you can't ignore other feelings of people. You know, we feel that these, you know, foreigners are eating our pets. You know, and it's true. What did he say? It's true in the feeling, or it's true in the feeling is true, or that the emotion is true, or something like that.
How interesting.
You know, so it was sort of vibes based, and that's that's not only you know, equally true of the verifiable, measurable reality. It's actually more true and more important, you know. So so they actually picked up these tools that were of, you know, critique and of, you know, actually being able to elevate different voices and worldviews. You know, that we all had that dream, and in the academy, it's taken those things and weaponized them, you know, in a really extreme way, you know, to be able to just dodge any crime, any bloody, you know, actual conspiracy, you know. But I mean, they've been playing this game for, like, I mean, it's nearly half a century anyway. But it was more of an elite tool before, and I don't mean the liberal left elite that everybody thinks of, but, you know, like with climate change, you know, is at least 4 decades, like an
Time.
actual documented, open conspiracy out there for people, for, mining lobby, energy companies, etc., to say, okay, well, this is coming, and, that's going to hit our bottom line and all the subsidies we get from government, all that kind of thing. So therefore, we will obfuscate, we'll sow seeds of doubt, and the public will challenge this. We'll insist on there being both sides, so that, two-throat, basically. So there's the reality that's reported, but it's got to be our side as well. And then we'll bifurcate this whole thing so it's a left-right bloody issue, and everybody can fight about it into infinity. And it's not, it's not gotten better; it's gotten worse. People real hard heads, stubborn, digging in their heels, doubling down, tripling down. This is a problem. They've been able. So that's an actual conspiracy.
Yeah.
Measurable, verified, documented. But, half the population are going with, well, no, it's Jewish space lasers. It's weather weapons. Climate change is a hoax. And there's these elite bloody, academic Satanist pedophile Jews who are changing the weather and targeting places and starting wildfires and setting off volcanoes, and you know what I mean? It's just like, oh my God. So, there are, so I guess there's classical conspiracism, which is, what, we've been doing in looking at structural racism, structural inequality, et cetera, the systemic sort of problems that, eat the world and exploit people and land. That's your classical conspiracism. Like, the plastics people, like, fooling everyone into believing that plastic is recyclable. And that, that's environmentally friendly. That kind of stuff, that's classical conspiracism. But, neo-conspiracism is just like absolute fantasy. Not really interested in protecting any real children who are being exploited, but, we will invent imaginary children.
The fantasy children that are being eating in a pizza basement in Washington, D.C.
And it's like, well, if you disagree with that, well, you're pro-pedophilia then, are you?
Yeah, exactly.
That kind of, So we're in trouble. We're in trouble epistemologically,
This is when I want to weave a little bit here with you. So as you were speaking, what I was thinking about was what you said at the beginning of the conversation, which is like your epistemology and your ontology are always in tandem, always making together, always collaborating together, both within and also in the wider within of the space of other people, of your relationships in the more than human world. And I think that what happened in post-structuralist discourse might be a really good example of what happens when you have a correct, a realistic, a helpful epistemology without the correct ontology to go with it. Because when you introduce the idea of everybody's subjectivity in and of themselves being a measure of the world, without the ontology of how to live collectively, how to build meaning collectively, this idea of reality being a shared consensus, then you create a world which we exist in today, where every single person can stand in their little individualized or small group defined part of the world and say, my version of the truth is correct, or our version of the truth is correct. Because we haven't learned in this part of, well, I say this part of the world, there's lots of different people living all over the world in every single land. But I think especially for the dominant culture that was ripped away from their lands a long, long time ago, that idea of consensus or of living collaboratively or understanding our fundamental interdependence has created the conditions where that knowledge production has become warped in a way.
Oh my God, yes. But then the importance of a diversity of stories, the pluriversality, the pluriversal understanding of existence that kind of is characterized now by the global South, but they used to be, everybody's way
Used
of
to be
looking at the
everyone.
world, is that, so you have your local stories, but then the next people over have a different, actually that constellation is called this, and the story is this, but these can exist, alongside each other, and actually enrich each other, in being different stories. And that comes down to the issue of border work, and I think that's a really handy way for us to start, I don't know, addressing this crisis of subjectivity, that's infecting our reality, that's kind of ruining everything in a post-truth world, is having an understanding of border work, how there is, exclusionary, eliminationist kind of approaches to borders, where these things are barriers, where you keep things out and you keep other things in, where the border is there to establish in-groups and out-groups. And it's not just a border of a country, but the border around each person. Yeah, and I guess the Indigenous protocols of border work are about facilitating norms of access and flow across those. So there is, discernment. There is a membrane, around each person, around each family, etc. But it's kind of a the border is a site of kin making, a site of relationality, of increasing, just that va, I guess, from the Samoan point of view. So every person and every group, there's that boundary, and that boundary is supposed to be a place of embassy, with the world, with other groups, with other people, and where you can share your really diverse worldviews and actually find really rich meaning, rich layers of meaning and solutions to things, and because every system is interconnected with other systems, and there is flow across them, in the natural world, with half the bloody life, half the biomass, in your local place migrates, seasonally, around your region, but then beyond it, even to the other side of the world, a lot of birds and fish and whales, etc. But then, a lot of seeds as well, and other wind-borne things, water-borne things. Some species of them migrate like above and below the ground in different seasons. There is a lot of movement and a lot of fluid sort of exchange cross between worlds that happens, in our lands, within our territories. And that goes for people too, and culture and language, relationships, adoption, marriage. There's that notion of freedom as being freedom of movement, of being able to journey where you wish to journey. And then there's that kind of, freedom of refusal, that you can just say no to any instruction or order that you're given. And these are basic human freedoms that belong to Indigenous people, but to all people, before these kind of dominant structures came into place. And there's also freedom of like association, affiliation. It's not a modern thing of spoiled bloody, millennials or whatever, that people choose to divorce their parents or, choose other families. You have the freedom and the right to, move and affiliate through marriage or adoption or any other way with, with other families. You can change your language, change your culture. That's always been the case. And it's this sort of fluid border work that allows for that. But there's these kind of imposed national identities and, ethnicities now that it doesn't reflect the reality, of most people on the planet who are in some way in diaspora. And most people do not live on their homelands.
Yep.
They've been moved, or they've chosen to move, or, and even if they identify still with that homeland that they maybe have never even seen, and that land might even be a different time, a different era, yeah, like, I used to be Thracian several generations back, someone might say, but now Thrace is not a thing anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, that's the reality, you know, of everybody. But this idea that you have these iron ethnicities and, you know, identities and cultures, it's so important for the power structures just to, you know, establish these insider and outsider groups and, you know, these mass compliance sort of structures when it comes to identity. And that's around family, like what a family is.
Yeah.
You know, what sex is, what love is, what marriage is, what, you know, all these things. That's how we do our that's how we do our border work now. You know, it's for these things that need to be policed and,
Yeah.
you know, fought over to the death. Every hill must be died upon. And so that's how the discourse is as well. Yeah.
You know, this is, if I may, I'd like to bring in fossil fuels right here.
Yeah.
Because having access to an energy source, figuring out how to work this energy source that allows us to artificially stimulate the energy of 1,000 generations in one day. It means that traveling through borders has become exponentially faster. And so if I were to think about traveling on foot or on mule through different worlds and essentially gaining the right to pass over each border, that would come with picking up customs and picking up language.
That's
and
it.
learning about the changing environments and traveling slowly enough so that nothing actually feels alien, like evolving with the land and the people that I'm passing through.
Yeah.
Whereas now, because of the speed at which we can go literally across the world, 24 hours to travel halfway around the planet on a normal passenger flight, I think that's part of what provokes this sense of alienation and fear, which then is the feeling that the right, the authoritarian, that fascism needs to make our borders static and iron rather than permeable and fluid.
Yeah.
Because there is no real way to travel through slowly enough to learn with, essentially, and then also to become with, to be changed by. And I think that's maybe partly why people are afraid to let others in and also afraid to go out, because everything just happens so fast. And that's hugely to do with the energy source that's available to us. And frankly, if we just electrify everything, that won't change that problem.
Yeah. Well, I think that's an effect rather than a cause. You know, sort of neoliberal systems. You know, that the problem with money is that it's been tied to your ability to survive.
Yes.
You know, it's been, you know, bound up with, you know, whether or not you can, you know, acquire the food, shelter, nutrition, security that you need just to survive, the absolute basics. You know, so, and that's how money, that's how wealth can be power, is only through that mechanism. You know, because if you could have access to the things you need to survive, without it, then worlds of work would be very different. You know, I could take 6 months to go to New York.
Yeah.
New York State and sit down with, I don't know, Nape or whatever people, you know, and meet other people as I go, and allow myself to change through that journey. But, you know, I don't. I jump on a frickin' plane and, you know, I get there and then then I have to figure out the time differences to make my medication work, which is weird. Like, there's nothing in psychiatry that talks about, you know, how you manage jet lag and switch arounds with your your daily medication. I've asked a lot of psychiatrists about that, and they thought, I've never really thought about that.
Yeah.
You know, but this is you are a worker. You know, you must work or you will die. You know, so you have to get there and hit the ground running on day two. In conference rooms and meetings and on screens and typing or building a structure in bloody Dubai or something like this. That's what your travel is. Your travel, it must have work. Otherwise, it's just a holiday where you've basically saved up to buy some of your time back from your owners. And then you spend that money to give yourself some time, where you will have a holiday. But, you're not going to spend all of that holiday traveling to get to the place. You have to get there straight away. So it's, this is the setup of it all. And, I mean, the whole history of Ford, and even the kind of, even the stuff that was about uplifting the workers and this lovely idea of like, well, everybody who works in our factories should be able to afford our products.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds fantastic. I mean, it's like, wow, Ford, are you a socialist? Like, well, no, I'm distributing pamphlets on the protocols of the Elders of Zion and shit in every freaking glove box of every car. And at the same time, I'm completely dismantling all of the public transport systems so that everyone will have to have one of these cars, and then I can put the screws into them. Like all of these systems, they're just they're just rubbish. They're all there to trap people. So travel is just bound up with the same power systems, and so therefore energy. And so even though fossil fuels have now become the most inefficient and the least profitable forms of energy, it's like the other systems like right now are currently being dismantled. Even the ones so there's in US right now they're like they're just completely dismantling all this stuff that's making massive amounts of money and so many jobs and all the things that we're supposed to like. In a growth-based economy, it's just like, well, no, we're going to smash all those and we're going to replace them with compulsory bloody, energy systems that have to be subsidized in order to even exist right now. So it's not anything. It's got nothing to do with it. It's not, it's not a fossil fuel-driven economy. It never has been. This is just one of those things that, well, this is what I have access to, and and I need to make it limitable and excludable and also compulsory for people to survive if they don't use these things, and so off we go. And it could be anything. That could be marshmallows, So I think it's a function. It's a result of the structure of the economic system rather than something that's driving it. And it has nothing to do with any of the things that they claim capital is about at all. It's just about it is just about control in the end.
Yeah, capitalism is a form of rape and pillage.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and I mean that just comes out of people's desire for security as well. Which is it's just also awful. Anyway,
it's all it's none of it's looking particularly good from this vantage point at this stage in the world. I was just my listeners will know this. I was just in South America making documentaries with marginalized communities who are on the front lines of the existential crisis in some way. For some, that was suffering under structural racism, not having the funding to educate their children, essentially, so doing it themselves. For others, it was their land being taken away, the threat of mining companies. And it was very interesting being there and seeing how these massive multinational mining corporations are now using the quote-unquote energy transition as the excuse for the next land grab, the green land grab. And seeing that impact on Indigenous people, on peasant farmers, on communities that are mixed through together, having, sort of eked out a subsistence and a pretty happy life for, a couple of 100 years together. And now in the name of the continuation of capitalism in its form, in whatever necessary form that takes, it causing devastating impacts. And yet that rhetoric not quite reaching the people who are meant to be most sort of allied to decolonial or post-colonial thinking or action on this side of the world. So from every vantage point, we're looking pretty stuck.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you have land and you have a land-based culture, land-based knowledge, land-based tradition, and you're living within that, then, I mean, I guess you're short of as being in poverty. But if you have those things, then you have no need.
Yes, exactly.
For to work to get your nutrition or health, shelter, all these things, or even meaning or knowledge or education, that is all provided by the land. The land gives you everything you need. And that's anathema and needs to be destroyed. People can't see that happening because who the hell would participate in any of this if they knew that was available?
Well,
and if there was just a sudden mass collective refusal, But I see all these like alt economies, platforms, projects, people starting up to do a commons or a alternative currency or a barter system where people are trading, directly their services and goods with each other. I see all these things starting up, but they're not economies of care, which essentially that's what you need. You can't you can't do any of these things unless there's that safety net there. It has to be foundationally an economy of care, that values care and has that at the center, care and carers, and everybody knowing that inevitably at some stage in your life somebody's going to have to wipe your ass for you, and people are thinking of that. But also they're unable. They just know that they have to have $1 million because you have to have $1 million basically if you want to retire.
I mean, if that's even enough anymore,
that would have to be the absolute minimum, and you'd have to live like a dog.
Yeah,
you have to be a millionaire to be able to live like a dog through your retirement, and have a dignified death. Yeah, and that's just so people can't jump. So all these things end up being, all these alternative economies. The structure is of a multi-level marketing scheme, a pyramid scheme. There must be a greater fool, and that means all green, regenerative finance, everything like that. It's all based on like either a government, demanding that corporations have to cough up, so they have to lose out. They have to lose money, or it's using taxpayer money to subsidize or fund, these credits over here or this, Right, we gotta have, a value for nature, all these things, and communal economies, collectives, anything like this, it's always somebody who's like, they've made a lot of money and they've just had an epiphany and they want to step out of it, but they still have to make a living, so they always want to set up these schemes in a way that will guarantee them an income, and it always means that someone has to, miss out, that there has to be enough greater fools to jump into this, scheme, and that could be a cryptocurrency or bloody anything. They all operate the same way. They all operate the same way, and I don't think that that's any worse than a distributed autonomous organization that's, all about creating a collective, commons, economic commons for a whole heap of people to look after each other. That they all operate the same way. So and it's not because people are stupid or evil or that they can't see any other way except this system that we're in. It comes down to the fact that people need to know that they can be fed and sheltered and not die on the side of the road in the rain. We're all stuck with that, and that's tricky. It would take everybody jumping at once, but even then, that would be, billions of people would have to die if everybody, collectively decided to refuse this. So, the only thing that could make that change is that, the whole idea of mutual aid activism is probably the closest thing. But basically, you'd have to begin, any revolution with, enough people saying, okay, I've got, I've made enough money to live for 10 years without working. So what I'm going to do is, for this whole community and neighborhood, I'm going to offer free babysitting. And that's what I'm going to do. Free babysitting and aged care to all the families, around here. A person would have to do that. And then those people with their time freed up, they might, then go, okay, well, we'll start growing food for the people who don't have enough food, or we'll start sharing, we'll make a bit of a food bank here. And it would have to be that. It would have to be an economy of care that grew up organically, out of something as simple as that. But that person doesn't do that. That person gets enough money to live on for 10 or 20 years. They accumulate that, and then they go, oh my God, I'm going to start up a whole new economy and currency on a platform, and I'm just going to go out and bloody, oh my God, I'm going to bomb everybody with spam until I get enough idiots who are prepared to invest in this thing. Anyway, that's, it's all a bit of a pyramid scheme, and most action is violent or non-violent, bloody, collective or individual.
I feel like we've reached a really good point where I could ask you, why is the world in crisis? We've covered that it is, that's for sure, but why?
It's just that Venn diagram. So nature, the idea of creating this concept of nature, as a separate thing, is a problem. That's fundamentally why this Venn diagram has happened, between what's real and what's true, your ways of being and your ways of thinking or knowing, the ontology, epistemology, that divide. It's not about left brain, right brain, or, collective versus individual, or bloody any of these things. That's the divide fundamentally that's wrecked everything. The land, your land, economy, governance, society, culture, this is one thing. It's not even a stack. A lot of people would envision it as a stack, but it's supposed to be one thing, and it's in the land and of the land, and there is law in the land, and there are flows, within that complex system. But basically, all of these systems are systems of signals. They're signaling systems. So I see the wombats that are nocturnal here. They're moving around in the daytime now, and have been for the last month or so. And that means bowerbirds are flocking. The wombats leave a different scent signal because they always defecate up high on rocks and logs. It's like a signal. But that's doing a different scent now because it's in the daytime and it's drying differently.
Oh, right.
And that triggers reactions, in everything. And every reaction, every behavior that responds to that, it catalyzes 1,000 other signals, through the system. And it stretches far and wide and across into other systems. It has a knock-on cascading effect, butterfly effect that, basically, it signals all the way from inland right to the coast. It signals the wattles on the coast to flower. And those yellow flowers signal, different birds to come in those scents. And then that triggers the migration of mullet, at that time. So you got these big schools of mullet, which also signals the sharks to come in, which signals people don't go in the water, because we're in the land. It also signals us, well, it's time to, move inland now, because we can hear that lyrebird with the mating call. It's cold time now, so it's winter, but we don't have this northern hemisphere idea of springtime is when the birds mate. It's like, well, some do, but eagles and turkeys and black swans and lyrebirds and all these different ones, they're mating and laying eggs and hatching them now. Bowerbirds aren't, and so they have their own time for mating, but what they're doing is flocking. They're flocking, and they make those beautiful murmurations, those patterns. That's a signal, and that signals other things to happen. They're part of the mating of, the quolls, the native cats. Here, they signal that, and they're actually part of that big ceremony of mating. And then the echidnas, then, because the ants are the foundation of all this. They put off different scents, and they locate themselves differently, but they also signal with they have little tiny white, red, and black rocks and sands and things that they store in their nests, and they're constantly putting different mixes of those colors to reflect light, absorb light, or keep it stable. And there's this mosaic happening the whole time that's responsive to the weather that's about to arrive. And so that signal goes right the way through the system. The ants are everything. So your echidnas, your porcupines, they start following the different trail that the ants are laying out there to signal across the whole system. And so the females start following those scents in a really excited way, and then they come into season, and you end up with a train of males, half a dozen male echidnas following them, nose to tail, kind of just following in these trains that are these processions that are amazing. And people think of that as which one will get to mate? Which one of these males will get to penetrate and be the winner? It's a competition. Right. But you only have to watch them to know it's not a competition. That from the bowerbirds flocking to the black swan chicks, following around, their parents, to the yellow flowers, to the flying foxes roosting, and all these things happening, that this is all sex, that it's all this one big ceremony, and there's one big ecstatic ritual. The bowerbirds are not, penetrating each other in that season, but they're in a state of sexual bliss doing their murmurations, which is part of the whole thing. And with these males, they're constantly changing positions, and all those brothers, this one might not mate this season, but his brother will next season, and it's they're not struggling for dominance or anything like that. They're in a state of bliss, and the final act is not really anything, which I guess anybody who brings us back to our subjective bodies, doesn't it? But anybody who's doing, coupling physically, with other people, that final moment is that's not the thing.
The end.
Yeah, the bliss is hours of, it's just bliss for a really long time, and then that part's kind of the end of it, which is a bit annoying. That's not your end goal. Your end goal is to be in that state of bliss, and to be, constantly doing that romantic dance through your life. That's the love magic that keeps things flowing. Everybody knows this at heart. So if we think of all these systems as signaling systems, where everything is regenerating, everything is just flowing with this love magic, and that it's all about border work, and that exciting, that really exciting energetics of testing boundaries and of building relationships there at the boundaries, and, keeping those boundaries fluid and enjoying the fluidity and feeling the flows across all the systems and the signals that go right through. Your economy is in that system of signals, and that's the voice of the land, the law of the land, and you are part of that. You're in responsive relation to that all the time. But if you're just following the Dow Jones or something, where that system of signals has separated itself from land and is not as responsive, unless there's a catastrophic storm that takes out a couple of power stations or something, Yeah, it's the signal systems are not aligned. Our signal systems, of what our behaviors and responses, they become misaligned with the land. I think you have those two questions. What's wrong with the world, kind of thing. And I would say it's just a misalignment of signaling systems that really should just be one thing. And then you had the other question of, who would you platform? And I would say, well, I would platform Ant, and I would ask people to read the Ants. I always say this, and I don't know, you can go Noble Savage and go, wow, that's really wise, and then that's it. Or you could go, that's rubbish, that's really, simplistic, bloody Indigenous stuff or whatever. That tends to be how you go when people read an Indigenous person. They do it for wow or woo or just wow, nothing. But seriously, I keep saying it because it's the answer everything. The foundation of your system. If you start paying attention to the ants and what they do, and then you'll start to anticipate changes in weather, temperature, flood events, bloody everything. You look to where they keep changing and moving and rebuilding their nests, and when they're carrying eggs upwards up trees and fences and walls, and then just that, that perfect night that they wait for, where everything aligns and they know that it's coming. They've got this precognitive thing about what the land's going to do because they're shaping it, and they transform and they grow these wings, and then at exactly that moment, it's just a couple of nights a year they'll explode out of the nest and fly around in this ecstatic mating ritual, and everything's joining in, like eating them and, following around. Everything gets really excited. It's like, there's constant beautiful things. If you want to understand your system and become embedded in your landscape, even a cityscape, is land, and the ants are always there. Like, follow the ants, read the ants, platform your ants. And all the answers are there. You can be responsive, to land and the actual ontology. And you can take others with you, and you can sit together with that. And then, your little collective there can sit together with other collectives and check in on their story, and you go from there. I wouldn't say platform thinkers. I think elevating and platforming thinkers, people, ideas, theories, it's not helpful at all.
Platform the ends.
Yeah. Yep. Hang with the ants for a bit.
Tyson, thank you so much for your time today. This was
no
a
worries.
really wonderful conversation.
Yeah, thanks for dragging it out of me in a good way.
If you want to learn more, I've put links to everything in the description box below. Remember to subscribe to the channel if you're new here, and share the episode if you enjoyed it. To support the show, subscribe at planetcritical.com, where you can read the weekly newsletter. You can also become a Planet Critical patron. All links are in the description box below. As always, my deepest thanks to that community. Planet Critical wouldn't exist without your support. Thank you everyone for listening and for coming on this journey together.